Hello, welcome to IP Voices, the international interview series highlighting the creative minds behind brands and innovation. Today, I'm super pleased to be joined by Melanie Jennison, all the way from New York City, where she's Senior VP at Colgate-Palmolive, responsible for trademarks and brand IP. And I think, Mel, you've been at Colgate for more than 14 years now.
I have.
You started your career as Chief Trademark Counsel for the oral health category. And today, you lead the team at Colgate responsible for all brand IP issues globally for all business units, which are oral health, personal care, home care, and pet nutrition. And before joining Colgate, you were working as a litigator for Kirkland Ellis, a major international law firm known, among other things, for its strong IP litigation practice. So thank you so much, Mel, for being here. And I have to say that we first met in 2013 when I joined your team at Colgate. So I'm super pleased to meet you again here virtually so we can have a discussion about you, your career, and some of your insights around the field where we've worked in the intellectual property area. Thank you, Mel.
Thank you so much for having me. We have known each other for a really long time, and we've always been very talkative with each other. So I think this is going to be a very fun and interesting conversation to have.
Absolutely. So let's first start with maybe you can give us a little bit of a flavor for the types of, brands and innovation that you've supported throughout your career. Maybe we start there.
Yeah, it's really been all over the place. I mean, as you mentioned, I started as a litigator. And so a lot of my practice was representing authors and artists and companies in the protection of their copyrighted works in particular, as well as their trademarks and other forms of IP. I've done unfair competition, trade secret cases. So it's really just run the gamut. At Colgate, it's more about, as you said, the brands behind the company. And that's, for oral care, that's Colgate, that's Elmex. We have Tom's of Maine. We have Hello. In addition, on the personal care side, we have Palmolive, which in the United States is a dish brand, but in the rest of the world is a personal care brand. And then, we own the Hills brand for pet food. So it's really interesting because it's a nice array of products. And then in terms of innovation, it's everything related to the development of the products, the packaging, the technologies. We're definitely in an industry where technologies are named. We file trademark applications all over the world, and we enforce our rights. And before I came to Colgate, I did that as a litigator. In-house, I'm doing it as the in-house person who directs the litigators.
Great brands, also super international, which is really incredible. What first pulled you into this field of IP?
So before I went to law school, I thought I wanted to be in marketing. And so I spent a few years in marketing and market research in particular. And then when I went to law school, my market research background was actually of interest to IP firms because of the fact that litigators do consumer confusion studies and other types of surveys for descriptiveness, for example. And so I was more courted by IP firms than by anybody else. An area that I was interested in, I had already taken classes on. And so it seemed to be something that I already had an interest in. And then it worked out that my background actually meshed really well. And so it was a selling point for me that I had this experience in market research because it made it easier for me to understand how consumer surveys were, to be able to field them, although a lot of the way that you field surveys has changed since I became a lawyer. And so that's really part of it. The other part of it is that I am surrounded by musicians. Both my grandfathers were musicians. My uncle's a musician, and they wrote music and they had copyrights in certain things and they did sound recordings. And it was just something where I have zero artistic tendencies, but I gravitate towards artists. And so I was always very interested in the field.
And it makes sense. You see, I remember very well when we worked together. I was always impressed by your understanding of consumers, but also your commercial insights. And I guess, you see, now I can put the two together. So what do you find the most rewarding now that you're working? I think, in our role, we work at the intersection of creativity, business, and law. What do you find the most rewarding about that?
I mean, I think that it changes so much all the time.
Hmm.
And that makes it interesting still after however many long, which I'm not going to admit to on the air. I've been a lawyer, there's always something new that's happening. There's new products, there's new innovations at the company, then there's new business models, there's new ways of marketing our products to consumers. And then the law is evolving as well. We, for whatever reason, even though I never considered myself a particularly tech oriented person, I am interested in technology. And, a lot of what I'm working on now relates to the way that we use technology to market our products, to get our advertising in front of consumers. And it keeps me young. I mean, we're all over social media. There's times when we're in a new social media where I have to go to my son and be like, okay, show me how this works. I don't understand this one. And then now I have all of the social media platforms on my phone and I know how they all work. And
Hmm.
that's something that I don't think, you really get in other areas of the law. Not that they're not as interesting because they are, but just this marriage of like tech and new business models and new ways of working, and then on top of that, good products. And it's Colgate, but we're a 200-year-old company. We sell toothpaste, and so it's really
Yeah.
great
Yeah. Products you can find at the store, in your
everywhere.
nearby store where you could actually show your family, here, I'm working on these products.
Yes.
I remember you creating really strong partnership with the business. So I would love to hear from you. What does it take, from your perspective, to be seen as a creative business partner, not just the person who signs off on the legal risk?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I think you have to look at yourself like you're a business
Hmm.
partner as well as being the kind of the risk manager for the company. Um, I don't view my job as being the one to say no to everything. I view my job as being able to make things work. And so I think you have to be curious and you have to listen and hear the team out as to what their objective is. It may be that there are some things about what they want to do that are a little more risky than other things. And it's really about trying to help them to understand what those risks are, trying to help them manage them. And I think that they're really appreciative when you take that approach, your business partners, because if all they see is a person who listens at the a very perfunctory level and then just says no, they
Mm.
don't trust you.
Yeah.
So it becomes a situation where you're not seen as one of the partners, you're seen almost as a parent. And, so you don't have people that come to you and ask questions when they're concerned about whether or not something is viable or not. They kind of hide. And that's not a good relationship at all. And I feel like my business partners trust me enough to know that if I do say no to something, which happens very infrequently, that I'm doing it for a good reason and not because
Yeah.
I just say no to everything. And most of the time, we find ways to make things work. I mean, it's rare for there to be an absolute no, unless it's something where I'm like, I don't even know why you're asking me this. This is obvious.
Yes. So I think you mentioned earlier that obviously your family, the fact that you have family members in music, has opened your mind to creativity and to this world of, I would say, copyright. How has working closely with all these creative, Colgate people and innovation teams at Colgate shaped your leadership style, or maybe the way you work today?
I think it's kept me humble.
Hmm.
More importantly than anything else, because as much as I may be, pretty decent at my area of the law and stuff like that, I am certainly not a chemistry person. I'm not a chemical engineer. I'm not a, a person that can draft really beautiful artwork. So, people have their talents and you appreciate those talents. And when you see really good work, it's exciting, even if it's not in your area, So I think that it's helped me to realize that, there's a lot of times where I am not the smartest person in the room for different reasons. Where I may be dealing with scientists, I may be
Hmm.
dealing with senior people at the organization who have a lot of experience and advanced degrees in marketing. And so it's kept me humble, but it's also kept me curious. Again, I think that there's a lot to learn from other people in other areas, and it keeps it interesting, if nothing else. So I find that I enjoy it, and maybe it's that enjoyment that also comes out because it doesn't come across like, oh gosh, here she comes again, Darth Vader coming through the hallways, just like, no, no. It's, it's very much like, oh, what are you working on? Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
we can protect that as a copyright and we can do this and we can, so I think that's really kept me interested even after 14 years at the company. Um, and it keeps me kind of motivated and
Yeah.
positive.
Very cool. Excellent. We will pivot to the international nature of the field. So, because of course your work is very global, I would love to hear from you a little bit on, how innovation and brands are approached differently in different, in certain regions. And where do you in your work the biggest divergence from your perspective, and how does this difference affect how maybe a global company operates?
So, as you mentioned, Colgate is truly a global company. We operate in all the countries. If there is a country, there's a good chance we sell there, and if not directly through one of our distributors. I think that divergence wise, I don't know that it's so much of a divergence, but it's, China's a big area for us. We have a very strong team there, and we have to deal with the challenges that come with a lot of the counterfeit manufacturing coming from China and, the capabilities to come up with very strong lookalikes that, maybe can fool people based on visual effects. The proliferation of AI, which I'm sure you're going to hear that in almost every single one of your interviews, has made it very easy for people to create very realistic looking advertising
Mm-hmm.
and to do all types of fraud and diversion
Mm-hmm.
online. So it's not so much that the laws are different from country to country, which they are, and but what we're dealing with more so than, differences in different parts of the
Yeah.
world is really more what the market landscape looks like in that part of the world.
Yeah.
So, we operate all throughout Africa, for example. There are a lot of lookalike products from China in Africa, so we're very much focused on making sure that African consumers who are expecting to get Colgate products are getting Colgate products and not one of the ripoffs. So it's a priority for us, and we need to make sure that we're going after the lookalikes and taking care of things where they are.
Yeah.
And that can change because it could be, that China's the big market where there's a lot of export of different types of, cats and lookalikes. And who knows, maybe, in a couple of years it'll be someplace else.
Yeah. Very interesting. So the field of IP is highly international. So I would love to hear from you, how has working globally shaped your worldview, but also because you're collaborating with people from many different cultures, do you have any tips on what it takes to collaborate effectively across culture?
So yeah, so interestingly enough, I did not have my passport until I was 27 years old. Like many Americans, I think,
Yes.
I don't know what the stat is now, but it used to be like
Mm.
50% of Americans don't
Yeah.
have a passport. I grew up in a two-bedroom apartment in Queens. I didn't think I was going anywhere, certainly not internationally.
Yeah.
And so that is one of my favorite parts of being at Colgate in particular, but also in practicing in the IP space, is that I truly feel like I know someone,
Yeah.
really know someone, not just kind of like, oh yeah, there's a person that I've paid to do like a little bit of trademark work in Tonga. No, I know somebody there. And I just love that. I love that I've been exposed to so many different cultures. I've had wonderful experiences with Colgate people for sure
Yeah.
around the world. And then with all of our outside counsel,
Yeah.
we've needed help a lot of times with different types of matters, whether it's doing new filing programs or an acquisition or something like that. And it just it's just been a wonderful experience for me. In terms of tips, I think you need to be very respectful, and the internet is your friend. So, for example, if you're not sure if in a different language somebody's name is male or female, you can go online and find that out. You can usually find the person online and see, or you can ask people for, what their pronouns are or something like that. So, I think culturally, it's important to be respectful and to understand, that everybody's coming from a place of good intentions, especially in our field, for the most part, at least the people on your side, right?
Yeah.
And so your business partners, your outside counsel, everybody's trying to help and the goal is the same. And, so it makes it, you really have to look at people as your partners and deal with everybody with respect. With all the craziness that's going on in the world, we're still dealing as IP attorneys, we still
Yeah.
deal with people in countries that our governments aren't necessarily friendly uh, with, not the people themselves, but the countries aren't in a
Yeah.
friendly position. And we still find a way to have heart for each other, to
Hmm.
acknowledge when something is going on, but to do it in a way that's more personal and less about, the politics of it. It's more like, hey, are you okay?
Yeah.
Certainly we have counsel in Lebanon, for example, and
Yeah.
when we email them, it's more, "Hey, are you
Yeah.
okay?" before we ever get to the part about, "Also, we need
Or-
your help," but which we
Yeah.
do, and they're professionals and they do both, but that's how you develop relationships is by seeing people as people.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think you can't once you realize that that's true, you can't really other
Yeah.
anybody.
Yeah.
It's just not possible.
Great tips. Thank you so much. So now we will pivot a bit to the value of brands and certainly, supporting one of the most well-known brands in the world. I'd love to hear what is your perspective now on what gives a brand value today, but also maybe economically, culturally, because reputation of brands are really important and they play a great role in culture and society. And how does IP shape that value from your perspective?
The thing that's people want to feel that they're supporting brands that espouse their values. And Colgate is definitely a very family and values oriented company for sure, and also a very international company with respect for people around the world and their pets, because we cannot forget the pets. And so I think that, from my perspective, we tend to be very protective of our brands, not just from a trademark standpoint, but also from a PR standpoint. And I think that goes from the associate brand marketing teams who are very young and inexperienced all the way up to the CEO. I mean, you want to make sure that nothing that you're doing, nothing that you're putting out is going to hurt the reputation of the brand. At the same time, with social media being what it is, you almost can't not offend somebody, even when you're not trying to.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where, you still have to operate and you still have to do the best you can. And so for us, trademark protection is also a way of protecting our customers, right? So when we have customers where maybe literacy rates aren't as high and there's trade dress infringement, that really bothers me
Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
really feels like you're trying to pull one over on the consumer. This isn't about giving cues that your product is similar to ours or maybe has a similar ingredient. It's that you're trying to trick someone into believing that they're grabbing a Colgate product. And
Yes.
for whatever reason, that just like eats at me more than most things. I tend to be pretty laid back overall, but that bothers me. So it's really about protecting our consumers. And other side, the flip side of that is if people get a lower quality product from
Mhm.
a company that they think comes from Colgate, that is not good for our brand.
Yeah.
And it can be especially depending on where the product is made and under what conditions, it could be really, really detrimental to the health of the brand because if somebody gets sick from brushing their teeth with a toothbrush that is made by a third party, completely unrelated to Colgate, where they're sitting on the floor and putting the bristles in with their own two hands, which we have pictures of, that is actually terrifying, and it's because there are serious health risks. Our factories are obviously pristine. I'm sure you worked at Halion. Their factories, I'm sure, are pristine with all the hair nets and the beard nets and the Tyvek suits and stuff like that to make sure that there's no contamination. And
Yeah.
then you see pictures of people making toothbrushes sitting on the floor, and just kind of putting them in with their hands and stuff like that with no protective gear on, no gloves. And you think, ugh, somebody could get sick.
Yes, absolutely. That's absolutely right. And in the end, they will blame Colgate, not the counterfeiter.
Well, right. I mean, they don't know if it's a counterfeit or a ripoff
Yeah.
or a close
A rip.
copy. They just
Yeah.
know that they thought they got a Colgate product and that it wasn't, while we know it wasn't a Colgate
Yeah.
product,
They might
doesn't
not.
really matter. The damage is done. People
Yeah.
post in social media right away, and then it's become a PR issue. But again, our first thought is
Hmm.
somebody got hurt or sick. That's our main concern before anything else. And then obviously, we care about the our brands in reality are our biggest value. Colgate's a marketing company, and most big brands are, at their
Yeah.
heart, marketing companies that, really feel like their reputation isn't just in the name of the company. It just so happens that our company
Yeah.
name has two of our products in it, Colgate-Palmolive.
Yeah.
But I think that even most of our competitors view their brands as being kind of the centerpiece. They may have great products, and they do, and we have great products, but the brand is where the reputation sits and where the heart is, where consumers, if that's where consumers know us.
Thank you for that. So now, do you have one example from your career that can illustrate the real impact, protecting an idea, a brand asset, innovation, creative works? Obviously, you see the products that, the team has worked on and cleared, but is there something that you could highlight that made you particularly say, "Oh, I see the real impact of our work as a team," or
Yeah, so it would be outside of the Colgate realm. In my
yeah,
litigation background, we certainly represented authors, for
yeah,
example, in copyright litigation. And really, one big case that I worked on involved the Harry Potter series and a case involving, a fan who
mm-hmm,
was trying to put together sort of a dictionary of all things Harry Potter. But unfortunately, there were very long synopses about characters and setting and big chunks of the book that were transferred over into this piece of fan work.
yeah,
And initially, it was only online, and the author and the company that owns the rights in the US wanted to, kind of just said, you know what? We like fans doing what they do
yeah,
online. Let's just leave it alone. It was
yes,
only once they decided to turn it into a bound book that they were going to sell that they said, no, we're not comfortable with that. That's a little bit
mm-hmm,
different.
yeah,
And it was really interesting to see not just the author's view of their work and how important the development was, the characters and everything, how the author looked at that work like it was their baby. But also to see the fan community, I thought that was amazing. And to see how we, as an author, as an artist, you want to appreciate your fans. You want to have them, enjoy your works and to, create fan fiction and artwork and stuff like that. But it's very hard to know where to draw the line. So That was a great case for seeing impact across the board, right? To
Yeah,
an artist who felt very strongly about their work. And I've worked with other authors and
yeah.
artists. I've been on the other side of artists who were upset with our companies when I was a litigator. And, people feel really strongly. I think in the creative community, it's they take it really personally if something is infringed. But then you have the fan community, and they kind of make your art come to life. And they certainly make you money because they're the ones that are buying all the books, all the merch, all the, going to see all the movies, buying the DVDs. And so I thought that was a really interesting case to be able to view the impact of IP on everyone involved on both
Yeah.
sides.
I would love to ask you about IP challenge where you had to be exceptionally creative. And, what maybe you could talk about the creative insight that made a difference.
So I think having a litigation background
Yeah.
definitely makes you a tend to be more creative because if not, you might not win your case. So you have
Yeah.
to really look at all of the potential arguments that you have, what the possibilities are, and you have to think about what the evidence is and ways that you can attack the evidence. As I said, I have a background in market research, and because of that, there was a litigation that I was involved with where I successfully knocked out two different expert reports on confusion on grounds that the surveys didn't replicate actual market conditions and other things and that the samples were not representative of the population, that there were issues with the controls, all of the things that
Mhm.
I'm not going to say that nobody would think of those things because you certainly would, but I do think that that's an area when you're looking at the other side's evidence where you do have to kind of be creative and think like, they got this survey. The survey says that we were the defendant in that case. And the survey suggested that there was a high likelihood of confusion. And then you look at it and you think, so your first thought is, uh-oh, that sounds like a problem. And then
Yeah.
the, you look at the survey, the design, the sampling, and all of a sudden you say, maybe there are some issues with this. This isn't
Mhm.
the right group of people. This isn't the way people buy products.
Mhm.
And so you have to argue all of those things.
Yeah.
With the internet being what it is, I think, and e-commerce being what it is, I think it's hard to say that things aren't sold side by side anymore because almost everything can be put side by side at some point. But, if the general rule is that your products are only sold in one type of store
Mhm.
and their products are sold in another type of store, so it's not just about the shelf and walking down a
Yeah.
supermarket aisle. But at the same time, if a search wouldn't yield the two products together, then you have to factor that in and say, I did 70 searches on Amazon for this type of product, and our products never showed up side by side because they're two completely different products. And so being creative in that way, I think is something that's unique for IP lawyers because I'm not
Yeah.
really sure of another area where consumer surveys are as important as they are in
Yes.
IP.
Yes, for sure. But what's interesting is, again, you see, obviously, being a litigator, as you said, really helps. But it's also the fact that you have a different background as well that you brought to the table. And so you don't just have the lawyer mindset, you have the consumer mindset. You put a different hat and you create new connections. So that's what's interesting to me is like, how can you be creative? And often I find that it comes when you connect dots from different areas of your life. You know what I mean? Or background that is not just the legal background or, the job that you have in front of you, right?
I think that's right. Yeah, and I think that everybody's a consumer, right? If you live in this world, you're a consumer of something. So there is an opportunity to just kind of look at yourself, pull yourself out of your lawyer hat,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
really look at the issue as a consumer. Would a consumer see this the way that I see it? ask around. There's always somebody at your company without a legal background who would maybe look at something differently than you would. So sometimes we do little kind of like informal surveys in the office, like, hey, if you saw these two things together, what do you think?
Yes.
And people, I mean, obviously there's a definite bias towards our own company, but that doesn't mean that people can't try to be
Yes.
fair and objective. And
Yeah.
so, it does help to kind of take yourself out of the I'm just going to argue mindset and say, well, wait a minute, let's look at this from a practical standpoint.
Yeah.
If I go into a store, do I see these two products together? No. Well, what about online? Because certainly, you know, we could see products online. And is that really the end all and be all? Does it matter? Right. So maybe, that may dictate how you do your survey, right? So you may not do an array, you may do more of an ever ready type survey because you don't want anyone to attack you on the grounds that you're showing things side by side that would never be side by side, right? So it goes both ways. You can be the attacker of the evidence, or you can consider, how do I want to develop the evidence on my side? And that level of creativity, still get to, I still get to work on things like that. So that makes me very happy. And at the same time, I think that the creativity in terms of being an in-house counsel is really about understanding the objectives of your business partners and then working with them to figure out ways to make it work that
Yeah.
are within the scope of the law and that are still true to the brand and true to what it is that they were trying to accomplish.
Yes. Thank you. So now, what has been your toughest challenge as an IP professional, and what did it teach you about the work, or maybe about yourself?
I think for me, the intersection of technology and IP has always been something. I was never a very good science person. I like computers and I like my phone, but I don't I'm not as interested in how it works. And I was never a software person. So
Yeah.
that is out the window now. I work on a lot of AI related matters. And so I've had to really get interested, learn about how technology works in ways that probably would not have been aligned with my interests from before. Because as I said, I come from a very artsy kind of background.
Yeah.
While there was market research and some statistics in there, for the most part, it was more about, feeling, right? And creativity and
Yeah.
beauty. And technology is very science driven and very much mathematics driven. And so those were not my favorite areas. So I think it was challenging for me in my own practice to really start to dig deep.
Yeah.
Having to understand AI, obviously, I think probably every IP lawyer has been asked questions about AI because the main cases in the beginning were patent and copyright cases, right?
Yeah.
So, and to this day continue, since it's about training models and developing models and things like that. And so our business partners immediately turned to our team,
Yeah.
and we needed to get up to speed very quickly on how some of these platforms work, how development happens, stay on top of the law as it's changing and developing globally. And immediately, you learn something was passed, and then people ask you about it right away. And not only are you all over the news about this stuff, so are our business partners because they know what's happening in this area. They want to know what they can and can't do. So for me personally, the challenge was to get interested in the technology. And now I am. Um,
Yes.
I'm still not an expert on the way the technology works. I always kind of have to dumb it down to its lowest common denominator. When I think about AI, I think about it's a brain. You're putting information into the brain and it's making assumptions now based off of the information that it has. And that I can understand. I'm very visual, so pictures with arrows usually um, but now I would say that I'm super interested in
Yeah.
the area.
Yeah. You taught me so much on the digital space. You definitely were extremely helpful to me when that transition was made back in the days. But I think on AI, because your copyright background, I'm sure it's super helpful because copyright is one of the riskier area. So I'm sure it has helped you tremendously as well, right?
I think social media was easier to understand, and the way that they advertise social media was easier to understand. When you think about, AI and agentic commerce and stuff like that, like now you're in a whole different field. So for me, the social media stuff was easier because it was like you have content and then you have an ad, or there's an influencer who is creating an ad for you. So that
Yes.
I felt like that was a little bit easier to understand. Here, it's like, how do we get the AI to recommend, as more and more people are looking at ChatGPT and Gemini to buy products? So not just to recommend, but, to say what's the best whitening toothpaste or what's the best natural deodorant. And then they're buying from there. And so how do you get recommended by the AI? And that is all technology related. So I do find this a little bit harder to kind of understand and to grasp how things work, but I'm getting there. And I think I've gotten there actually. So I do understand it a lot more quickly, because I've made the foundation pretty strong, and now
Yeah.
I can build on top of it as new, business
Hmm.
models and new ways of working progress. But as a copyright lawyer, look, I'm concerned. Obviously, there are a lot of people creating a lot of content, and people are being pushed to do things faster, and AI helps them do that, but it comes at a cost, especially if there's no real human involvement in the creativity. I know that there's been some thought about maybe making these types of work subject to some form of copyright protection, but thus far it doesn't seem like anybody has really moved the needle on that. Even in the United States in particular, even if you have a state that says that you own your creation, I don't know that could preempt federal copyright law, which says that if it's not human work, it's not protected. So you own it, but what do you own? Maybe not a lot. So
Well,
there's that, and
yeah.
then the other thing I would say is the use of technology to scam consumers is at an all-time high. I
Yes.
mean, we've seen whole websites put up, whole social media pages put up, and we know that they're not legitimate. We don't think they look legitimate, but to the average consumer, they could look legitimate. And
Legitimate.
the pictures are high quality.
Mm-hmm.
The fake
Yeah.
brands, the fake products, they're high
Yeah.
quality, it's good art in terms of being able to fool the average consumer, and a lot of times there's more misdirection now, there's more fraud, and, that's really been enabled by it.
Absolutely. And so you managed to get to a level where you're now comfortable. Is there a tip or two that you could share with other in-house colleagues who might want to feel more comfortable with AI within their companies? Did you do
Yeah, I
anything
mean,
special?
there's lots of explainers online,
Yeah.
and I've looked at a bunch of them, and there
Hmm.
are, take your CLEs. There are some really good courses that do the basic explanation of
Yeah.
how the technology works and
Right.
what it is. PLI in particular has some really good courses that were developed like they have the computer scientists come on. It's not a lawyer explaining. So you've got computer scientists that are explaining how AI works. And I think it's important to understand how it works so that you can identify where the risks are, right? So outside of our field,
Yeah.
there are risks with, pricing algorithms, for
Yeah.
example. That's not an IP risk, but it's a risk to the company. Don't understand how these models work and whether or not they're the only model or everybody's got their own, you can find yourself in an area where you're not really anticipating risks
Yeah.
because you don't understand how the technology works and you don't know how it's being used in the marketplace. So I think I definitely do whatever data camp. There's a lot of companies and there are a lot of places where
Yeah.
you can go to get some basic understanding of AI. I would just take as many as you can and figure out what is the best way for you to learn about it. And then you can move on to, thinking about the law and the intersection of IP and AI or whatever, your field is. And then you can start to really anticipate the way that either your firm or your company is going to be using AI in the future and what
Yeah.
that means. I mean, obviously, everybody has seen the law journal articles about people using AI
Yeah.
in court, and it
In
turns
court.
out that
Yeah.
all of the cases were AI generated
Manipulated.
and non-existent. You don't want that to happen to you as a lawyer. So understanding even the basics that those hallucinations are real, using general purpose models means that these models have been trained on good and bad information, and it doesn't know the difference.
Yes.
It's
Absolutely.
just information to it. And so I think understanding that and then just doing what you
Mhm.
would have had to do if you were a first year associate and going
Yeah.
back and checking, is that the right case? And if you can't find it, then do not cite it. But I do feel like that was one of the pitfalls early on, was that people trusted it in
Trusted it.
ways that perhaps it's not
Not
where
there
the
yet. Yeah.
expectation
Yes.
is you're like, write me a brief on this type of
Yeah.
issue, and give me case citations, and it's going to give you 100% accurate information. And it does not do that.
I learned this from you back in the days that, you know, before you're able to identify the risk on these new technology, when e-commerce became so big, understanding the technology. And I learned this from you. I saw you actually, understood the technology because you would explain it to us. And so I thought I should give you credit for that.
Thank you. I appreciate
So
that. It's nice to hear
absolutely.
that it had an impact.
Yes, you have. And I think it's a very good advice because we don't take the time. Maybe a lot of us, do not think that we should be taking the time in this, but I think it's critical because that's going to make the difference between, a lawyer who will understand AI and understand the risk and be able to support the business maybe better than somebody who doesn't understand the technology. So now we're going to move to a misconception. So is there a misconception about the field of IP that you've worked so many years in it? That you would like to correct once and for all?
I have several. There is no 80/20 rule in copyright. There is no, if you change 20% of a work, you are no longer in the realm of infringing that work. That is a long-standing myth amongst designers. I've heard it in the past 14 years, I've heard it before, and for whatever reason, we just can't get rid of it. No 20% change rule. That's not how that works, So that's one. And the other is that while there are state law claims for idea misappropriation, that the vast majority of IP does not protect your idea. So and there is such a thing as independent creation. So we have people, they're like, this is my idea. I came up with this. This is, in a creative space, obviously not in an invention area. And I'll say, that's nice, but the execution is different here and ideas are not protectable. So those are my two things. One,
Yes.
no 80/20 rule. And the other is, despite it being a clear area in copyright law that ideas are not protectable, only the expression is protectable, our business partners often have a hard time divorcing those two things. They think the idea is protectable,
Yes. Yes,
and it is
absolutely.
not.
It's not. Let's say it again.
It is not.
Not
Ideas are not protectable.
acceptable.
While like I said, there are idea
Yeah.
misappropriation claims
Yeah.
under state law, but they have very specific criteria. There had to have been some sort of meeting and
Yeah.
understanding about the idea, and then there's a misappropriation.
Yes.
That's usually not what we're talking about. We're talking about like, oh, we did this ad campaign and it's got an apple in it. And then somebody else says, well, I have an ad campaign with an apple in it. And it's like, okay, well, let me see the
Yes.
executions. Let me see what everything looks like. I don't know yet. I have to see it. And they're like sort of taken aback by the fact that we're looking at the entire ad, for example. They're just pointing out something very specific in the ad.
Yes.
And we're like, that's just one piece. We can't look at that in a vacuum. We have to
Yes.
look at the creative works as a whole. And I'm just not seeing it. And, that could be frustrating for them because they feel very strongly that something that belongs to them has been
Yeah.
taken.
We go back to this very emotional,
Yeah.
reaction and to ID generation or
Yep.
creation, right? It's very personal for
It
a lot of
is. It
yeah,
is, and so I think it's important to, like, acknowledge that
mind.
as well and say,
Yes.
"Look, I know that this is really
Yeah.
important to you,
Yeah.
but from a legal standpoint, there's
Yeah.
limited ability to do anything here," and we can talk about ways next time that we can
Yeah.
create something a little bit more protectable or
Yeah.
maybe file copyright applications for a particular type of design or trademark applications for that matter, and then
Yeah.
you'll have different and better protection.
Protection. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So now we will look at the future a little bit, and I would love to hear from you. How do you see the world of IP evolving, and what do you see as the next big challenge for the industry? And
Well, so when you think about it from the standpoint of copyrightability of
hmm
AI works, right now, without significant marking systems in place, there are opportunities for you to kind of quote unquote hide the fact that your creation is AI generated, right? So if you do a digital ad and some parts of it are AI generated, people may know or they may not know. In the future, they will definitely be able to know.
yeah,
And so it's not so much that you're hiding the ball, it's just that people are still very hesitant to copy each other in that space. Once you figure out that somebody's work is fully AI generated and not subject to copyright, you're in the land of now we can do nothing, right? So when I talked about the idea versus the execution, if the execution isn't even copyrightable, now
yeah,
we have a third party who has copied an ad
mhm,
verbatim, put their trademark on it, made a couple of tiny changes, put their own branding on it, and we say, "Well, it's fully AI generated," but we have
yeah,
nothing to do enforcement on,
yeah,
unless there is some sort of change in the way that the law is going with regard to the copyrightability of fully AI generated works. So, areas of copyright protection that I think companies and people,
yeah,
artists relied on for years may not be available to them if they
mhm,
start to, work more with AI to
yeah,
generate content. And like I said, as things are being marked, somebody along the way is going to put the two and two together and say, it's marked as fully as AI. It's
yeah.
marked as AI, and I would like to use it copyrightable. So I can use it verbatim as is, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. That worries me.
Yes, I bet. Hopefully, there will be some changes in the law because it doesn't seem to be necessarily right either because it takes a lot of skills to create some really good product using AI. And maybe you feed it, you feed the AI your assets and then you have to tweak, but it takes a lot of work
It
and a
does.
lot of creativity to do that. So I feel like hopefully there will be some advancement in this space because there's a lot of great AI generated works that I'm sure I cannot come up with even if I tried because there's people with great skills who are able to do that.
Yeah, I think that's right. The original case that went to the federal circuit with the person who created the art, they had a significant amount of prompting, right? So it wasn't just that this is the artwork that came out. They did a lot of prompting to get that artwork to its final destination. And the Copyright Office basically said
Yeah.
no. And the prompting, I think, and the uniqueness of the prompting could be where there
Yeah.
is some marriage, right? But the AI keeps getting better so that you need less prompting to get to a better result. Not always. I mean, it still cuts off heads and hands and does all kinds of craziness. But, if you're in a system that is the more advanced it gets, the less it will require to get you to where you want to be. So
Yes.
your prompts may not be very long or detailed at all.
Yes, that's true. But is the future then, do you see the future to be maybe companies having their own closed AI, which I think is very expensive to develop, tools where they feed in all their materials and basically it's based on their materials. But even that would not necessarily, be protected until we have, some changes in the law. But I would imagine that big companies with lots of content and assets might do this in the end, right?
Yeah, I think that that's a possibility that, people move to this, like, we're going to work in a we're going to do a stable diffusion type system where you get the model and you start to really train it and tweak it
Yeah.
on your own materials. And then so all of the output is arguably an derivative work. So you can base it off of any claims off of the original human created work. But I do feel like there needs to be some sort of middle ground there where it is, because otherwise it's going to be a free for all for a lot of AI generated work. I mean, I think at this point, your best advice to somebody who wants something that is fully copyrightable is don't use AI.
Don't use AI.
Not, maybe for like idea generation, but
Yeah.
that's it.
But companies want to use AI for cost reasons, right? Because it's getting more affordable. So there's lots of creative agencies and partners out there that are using AI. So it'll be interesting to see how this whole creative industry will evolve.
I definitely see shifts already in our advertising
Mm.
agencies.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of time. They're initially we're using it for ideation, right? Give me some
Hmm.
ideas for a new
Yes.
campaign kind of thing. And I think that's perfectly fine to just get the ball rolling, right? To get yourself thinking, get the creative juices flowing. But now it's moved to a place where we can get something out and
Yeah.
usable in half the time, in,
Yeah.
a third of the time that it took to do it fully human generated. And the internet is such and social media is such that you have to have new content. And that's where I see the real pressure. It's not there is cost savings for sure, but you know, you have to have new content all the time. You can't just post like once every couple of days. You've multiple posts a day, live streams, doing all of this other type of content. And it's very difficult to do without a full-time
Yes.
100% staffed, or maybe, you either have to hire everybody or you really have to sort of lean into some of the AI tools that are available.
Yeah.
And in order to be able to make those metrics, right? Where it's like, I need to be posting 3 times a day, or I need to be putting out 1,000 pieces of content a week, which is not unheard of. That's not unreasonable, particularly in Asia, where social media use is so high. And the expectation is that there is going to be new content up all the time.
All the time. Yeah. So to be continued. And last but not least, we will close with one final question. And if you had to sum up the value of the work, your career in IP in one sentence, what would it be?
I look at it like my epitaph, right? So
Yeah,
when I retire, how would I sum up my career? It's really very simple. I protected the rights of my clients, you know?
that's right.
I protected the rights of my clients. And I guess with Colgate would also be I protected the value of the brands.
Of the brands.
So those
Yes.
two things together. I mean, it's simple, but I do think that at its heart, that's really what we do. And while it sounds simple, it is not simple to do that. It's certainly not simple to do that on a global basis.
Yes.
I don't think it's simple to do that in a single country anymore, given the way that technology works right now. So while it can be boiled down to a fairly simple sentence, how you execute on that is a whole different ballgame.
And I'm super pleased that you've joined me today because, it's very special for me to have you here today and have this conversation, especially, after all these years working together. So thank you for sharing so much and taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. Obviously, I just have to add one caveat. This is my personal opinion on this. I'm not representing the company that I work for in regard to any of the statements that I've made today.
Absolutely. Well, duly noted. Thank you so much, Mel.